Hi, this is Evelyn Lopez. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear, the Earth911.com podcast for the week of September 24th, 2018. We are recording at the lovely Moonyard recording studio. Lovely.
It's lovely. And every time we say it, Doug makes a face.
Spacious.
Spacious. Hey, there's room for a table.
Spacious.
Beautiful Moonyard recording studio, Tacoma, Washington. This week we're going to talk a little bit about, of course, stories from our website and answering Earthling questions and some other tidbits. So I'd like to welcome our participants. We have Mitch Radcliffe, our Earth911 publisher. Welcome, Mitch.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Bien. ¿Y tú?
How was Alaska?
It was incredibly beautiful. I have to say, my husband and I took a quick cruise up to Alaska. We did it sort of spur of the moment because we could drive to Seattle, get on a boat, and go. So not a lot of planning. It was gorgeous. And we did it to sort of test our tolerance for being on a cruise.
Yeah, you got to do that.
Because we thought, that might not be for us. It was great. We had a really nice room, so that was a lot of it.
I've heard that about Alaska. You may not feel that way about the Caribbean.
Yeah, that could be. I don't know. We'll see. We'll keep our eyes open for somewhere else to cruise. We also have joining us today Earth911 writer Trey Grangert. Trey, how are you today?
I am lovely, and we got some rain today, which is always nice in Arizona.
Wow. So was it like normal rain, or was it like monsoon deluge rain?
It's the kind of rain where it doesn't actually notice on the ground. Like, you can see it in the air, and then it evaporates as soon as it hits because it's still over 90 degrees.
You have magical rain.
That's kind of nice, though. So it sort of is cooling and moisturizing.
Yeah. Like a mister.
Like a mister.
Nice.
Lovely.
Everybody can pretend they're a quarterback on the sideline.
Well, and school just started here in Tacoma. We had a week delay because of a teacher strike, but the kids are back in school this week. We've got some beautiful fall weather today, which is,
although we have had
really
monsoon
nice.
rains.
We have had monsoon rains, but, I got to tell you, my yard was so dry, I didn't mind one bit.
I don't mind it, but it is early and it is colder than normal.
It feels like we're saying that all year long, isn't it? Like we're
Everything's
1 month
early.
ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trey, what about you? Are kids back in school in your area? I assume so.
We go back super early here. They were back in early August, which always confuses me because the summers are so rough and you go through September with 100-degree heat.
Yeah.
That they get out in early May when it's still nice weather there. It always mind-boggles me in Arizona how they do their schooling.
That is surprising. Well, especially, they must have air conditioning on their buses, I guess, but it's so hot.
Well, it gives them more cool springtime.
I guess so.
I see. If I were a student down there, I just want spring break or spring training off.
Oh, yeah, that would be great.
And then you could just go to the games, then go back to school.
That'd be perfect. Well, before we get started, we wanted to update you on our surveys. So we have 2 recent Earth911 surveys, one about your workplace offering commuting options, and the second one about checking labels for ingredients and recyclability. So, Mitch, tell us a little bit about those survey results.
Well, so we do these surveys every week, and we're building essentially a picture of what Earthlings are all about. And I'll be working with a team to start to characterize this in some articles. So we've had some people say, "What are you asking all these questions for?" But that's why we want to be able to say Earthlings care about these things. So the first one, and both of the results this week are pretty stark. There's a clear divide. First question was, does your workplace offer commuting options? And only 25% of Earthlings said yes. 75% said no. Now, that may be because some of our audience is more suburban or rural than many other areas, but the 25% are fortunate to be in companies where they do have a program that will help them offset their commute, or especially by getting them into mass transit or a van pool. And we certainly encourage business to think about how to do that because it'll reduce the carbon load just of getting your employees to work. And, of course, home again. Not that an employer wants somebody to go home and stop working, I suppose.
No, but, so I spent a long time working for the state of Washington, and the Commuter trip reduction program is a huge one. And one of the byproducts that's beneficial is you need a little bit less parking, or at least projected you can maybe get by with a little less parking at workplace. And the other one is it's actually pretty good for if people get into a van pool or they get into something they enjoy. It's actually a good retention tool, and people enjoy it.
It's a great retention tool. When I was at Microsoft up in Redmond, Washington, and I happened to have been up there for lunch yesterday, there was a bus system on campus. There's a bus system from campus to campus. There's individual cars to drive people around so that if they take mass transit, they can still get around the place. And they have drivers. You just call a car and it comes and picks you up. And then they have long-distance bus service in, with Wi-Fi, the San Francisco commute, Wi-Fi and coffee shop.
So you can keep working.
And but it was spectacularly successful in terms of building bonds amongst people who were coming to work and across teams too, because these weren't necessarily folks from the same team that came from one part of the area or another, and so it knitted the company together. Mm-hmm.
Well, Trey, what's your experience in Arizona? Do you see a lot of employers providing some kind of commuting options, or is it less popular there?
A lot of my friends work for companies that aren't based in Arizona. So they have the convenience of they haven't been pulled into another state to work, so they are allowed to work from home as a result, which is very nice. That
is nice. And that was, one of the hopes, 10, 15 years ago was that as increased work flexibility came about, we might have people reducing their commute in that way.
Well, the era of the Digital Nomad, which oddly came from the title of a book I did in 1991 about the Power Book, started with me telling my boss, now that I have this computer and the internet, why do I need to sit in a cube? Mm-hmm. And I think we had a lot of aspirations for a more efficient society, but we also built in a lot more trips. And what we're going to see happen over the next 10 years is a greater reliance on virtuality, so that we'll only take those trips when they're really important. Mm-hmm. And we haven't gotten to the point where we're comfortable with not being face-to-face, except at a critical moment.
Right.
And what, the economy is sort of inefficiently built on being face-to-face as much as possible, or being completely virtual, but not a mix. And just like we talk about consumers needing to make choices, we're going to make choices about when we need to get together, which will also change the whole nature of social capital. The idea that you showed up will really count, or that you didn't show up will really hurt.
Yeah. I wonder what will really count then in the future.
It's hard to say. I mean, the more I look at where we are today and the converging forces of the need for sustainability in order to be to survive with prosperity, broadband connectivity, wireless connectivity will be just everywhere. Mm-hmm. The new gig workforce and the idea that work and companies are permeable will change not only how we work, but also the nature of the social safety net.
Yeah.
And the social safety net includes our education and our recycling systems. So all of this is going to start to change, and it's going to change very quickly. We'll be talking about the Global Climate Action Summit later in the show a little bit too. And there were a lot of important announcements at that show about smart cities, about funding for green programs and green energy, about new commitments by cities and counties as compared to nations, and a lot of people standing up, especially corporate people, and saying we're going to make the Paris numbers even if the president doesn't want to do it.
Wow, that'll be interesting.
So the other question we had in the surveys was, do you check home and food goods for the labels for ingredients? That is, are they toxic or not?
Yeah.
And recyclability information. And boy, this one is Earthlings are diligent. 93% said yes, and only 7% said no. So, what we are seeing too, and this is a question we get a lot from folks who send in email, is how do I know what was recycled, not just whether it's recyclable?
I see. So they want to know what happened before they buy it.
Right. So we're starting to try to deal with that with some, I guess I would call them comparisons or reviews of products that claim to be sustainable. Mm-hmm. So you'll see some of the first ones of those in the next week or so, about the time we release this podcast, that compare products that are sustainable but are sustainable with different carbon or social impacts.
Oh, interesting.
And so we think it's time, and consumers are telling us that they want the kind of information that lets them make a smart choice, not just, take what they have to take. And so, do a little voting with your money. So this is an excellent indicator that Earthlings are ready to ask for what they want.
Yeah. I have to say, I check labels for ingredients, but it's only recently that I've started to think about the recyclability and the sustainability of the product itself. So I would say I'm learning as I go.
Well, and we all are. As I'm not the example of a great recycler. Part of the reason I got involved in this was to better myself. But boy, is it hard to make these choices.
Yeah.
And to stop sometimes and think about all the things I could do and which one would be the first or most effective thing to do, given what I could spend my time doing to improve myself.
Right. Well, Trey, I know you've been working and thinking about recyclability for a long time. So is this something that you do rather naturally, or do you also have to sort of remind yourself to think through these options?
I think at first when I was getting involved in being green, I was doing this kind of stuff. Now I kind of know the industry and what manufacturers are doing with certain brands. The nice thing for me about looking at this poll is I actually wrote an article for Earth911 back in December about trying to predict what the biggest green trend was for 2018. And my prediction was people looking at labels more. So I love we're seeing that response to this Earth911 reader so far.
You're the man. You picked it.
That's good.
I didn't see the China ban come in as strong, so that's probably going to be more important at the end of the year, but this is definitely promising that the labels are trending so well.
Well, it's interesting, too. So we even have been getting some questions on Facebook and an email saying, how quickly are you updating the database in response to all the changes in China? So people are aware of this, and now they're looking critically even at the database listings. And we've had, for instance, Best Buy changed. They would no longer take DVDs and CDs in their packaging, which had been the primary place people took this stuff back. And we had to go through and update every single one of those, and that's a China ban.
Wow.
Response. But, folks, if you want to help us, we do have about 2,800 people who have been contributing to the database for many years. And if you go to the site, to the search site, you'll see down at the lower left-hand corner a little login, and it says you can create an account here. Once you do that, you can add and modify listings in the database. So, a lot of the time, the changes in the recycling programs are not widely promoted because the city or the company doesn't want to acknowledge that they're cutting back. And so we have to rely on some customers saying, we've been told. And if people pick that up and start to put that information in themselves, we'll get this information disseminated a lot more quickly. So we are always looking for volunteers for that.
That's good. That's great. Well, today I thought we would focus on sort of making a fresh start in fall and our best practices along with back to school activities. So I would say getting in the habit of checking your labels, considering your recycling options, and I'll add into that, Mitch, getting involved in our database. All of those are some best practices that people can start on right now.
Information and knowledge is going to change the world.
Yeah.
Ignorance is going to keep it right where it was.
So we have a new survey up every week. This week we're asking, would you pay for expert recycling help? So see that on our website and check back. We'll recap our findings on these podcasts.
Yeah, and that question, by the way, comes from people who have been asking us, do you do recycling services? And there's a point where, and this also relates to one of the interviews that we've recently done that we wanted to talk about, where the labor involved in recycling itself has been under-recognized because it's usually just lumped in with the perception of picking up the trash.
Right.
But there's a separate set of behaviors, and there's a lot more efficiency that could be created by just getting the garbage company out of the process and getting the materials, which are well sorted at the curb, to the
directly
recycler.
To the recycler.
So we're curious as to whether or not that's something that would be of interest. And so last week, if we turn to our other
tell us about
interviews.
the interviews you've been doing.
So we talked with Bernie Lee, who's a commodities research analyst at the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, and or ISRI. They're a sponsor of Earth911, by the way, folks. And Bernie talked about his recent editorial in Scrap Magazine called "The Service, Value, and Labor of Recycling," and he's arguing that essentially if we broke down the various costs of recycling, we'd see more clearly the benefit of spending money now to ensure that manufacturers' plans for responsible disposal of stuff that they make at the end of its useful life would radically optimize the waste stream is what we call it. And that would give us the beginning of a strong circular economy. I think it's a great interview, and we've had some really positive responses from folks online about it.
Well, I'll tell you, this hit home recently. Someone had posted in social media on Facebook a local story from our local environmental services agency in Tacoma saying, please wash and dry your cans if you're recycling them. And some of the responses to that post were, and one person who I know said, there is no way I am washing out my cat food cans. And I intervened and I said,
then you're not recycling.
Right. And I just said, if this is something you're just not going to do, you'd be better off just throwing it in the trash, because otherwise you're going to contaminate the recycling that my washed and dried cat food cans are going into.
Wishful recycling is the problem.
It's a big problem. And you know what? Even at the end, and this is a granola woman. I mean, she's a greenie. And even at the end, she just said, I'll rinse them, but I am not drying them. I am not doing this. And she said, if they really want this done, they need to have it at the facility, some industrial washing process, because that's unreasonable. And I just thought, okay, we've got a really big disconnect here.
Right. Well, and so thinking about it from the perspective of how much energy you're going to spend just to wash that out and how much water usage.
It's cost prohibitive. Yeah. It just is.
Well, so let's talk about the other one, the other interview, which was with Monica Stevenson. She runs iDazzle, and she's a gemstone buyer, but she's also a member of the board of directors of Ethical Metalsmiths. And on our Monday, September 17th episode, we talked about her experience getting involved teaching artisanal miners. That's people who live alone or in small communities digging mines out of the ground with their bare hands.
Is that something that's going on in this country, or is it more in other areas?
Other areas of the world, particularly Tanzania.
So I know there's gold miners in this country, but I haven't heard and I think there's probably some gemstone diggers.
There are gemstone diggers all over the place, but she describes going 70 feet into the ground, down a 30-degree shaft to a small room where 4 or 5 people are picking out knocking the wall apart and finding out whether they found gems. And these are people who literally are living on what they can pull out of the ground. How do you get them to make changes is a really big challenge. And they can and they will when they learn it's about their safety, the safety of their children, and then because they're being more efficient, the opportunity that's created for their children. So, and ethical jewelry is also, in some cases, been a kind of a greenwashing effort, response to things like blood diamonds and so forth. But this is a genuine effort by a group of jewelry people to start to make their supply chain cleaner and more sustainable. So it's a really interesting story to hear. It's one that you have to think past a lot of our prejudices, about De Beers, and think about the small people who are involved at various levels of getting something that becomes a part of you, know, because jewelry is a pretty intimate purchase. And, even if you stick it in your ear, what are you sticking in your ear? Is it something with a story of pollution or a story of sustainability? And I think Monica's conversation was really useful. Oh, that sounds really interesting. I'll have to give that a listen. I haven't listened yet. So is there some marketing to this too? So if I go out to buy jewelry, I can figure out. That's just it. It's not even, it's at the point where those questions are just being formalized. So she does share some questions that you should ask your jeweler. Okay. So if the jeweler can't answer those questions, more than likely the answer is it's an unsustainable process. Interesting. Okay. Well, next up we have stories from our Earth911.com website. And as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about honing our best practices both at home and at school. Fall is a great time for taking stock in what you've been doing and making positive changes. So we thought first we'd ask Trey to talk about 2 really great articles that he's had recently on Earth911.com. First, defining what's recyclable in the United States. And second, how do you do a home waste audit? So Trey, do you want to start in on talking about what's recyclable? Absolutely. So there was actually a few things that prompted me to pitch this story to Earth911. The first is we've had a lot of news recently about industries trying to make recyclability definitions. The most recent one is the Association of Plastic Recyclers. They put out a list of 4 conditions that would define whether a plastic is considered recyclable. And the other thing that really drove this story was
I've been involved with Earth911 for a long time, back since 2007. And anytime I tell someone that I meet or that I'm friends with about Earth911, it immediately prompts them to ask me some variation of the question, is product X recyclable?
All the time.
That confusion, like, can I put this in my blue bin? And I always wish it was a yes or no question.
Yeah.
And I think in America, we often assume it is a yes or no question. Part of the reason for that people might not be aware of is that a lot of our decisions have been driven by what they've done in Europe. And Europe is really, really good when it comes to recycling, both with the infrastructure and education. So they can make national standards as far as, yes, this product, you can recycle it. But the thing people got to realize is if you look at a country like the UK is about the size of the state of Michigan, both in population and in size. So for us to try to extrapolate that in America, it would be like trying to ask, can I recycle this product in Michigan, not in the entire United States?
Right.
So a few things to be aware of. I definitely encourage people to read the article. Is the access to recycling programs is super key to determining whether something is recyclable in your area. The example I gave in the story is glass bottles. I think most people just naturally assume they're recyclable. If you live in Montana, there was actually a big story that came out back in 2010. Target, the grocery store, set up a in-store recycling program where they would take glass and metal and plastic containers designed more for people who are shopping in the store just to have a place to recycle. But in Montana, there is no glass recycling market. There's no one in the state who can recycle this product. So it's all of a sudden the Target stores in Montana just got swarmed with glass bottles.
Wow.
And they took this, instead of having just one bin in the store for glass, they had to put a front of store, what's called a roll-off box, one of these dumpsters where the public could bring their glass and put it in the container. And eventually they lost so much money having to transport those bottles to Utah, they discontinued the program entirely in one state. So they now have 49 states of recycling programs and one state with nothing available.
Wow.
So the choice I made in the story is glass recyclable? Because if you're in Utah, you'd probably say no, because there's no way for me to actually recycle it locally. So therefore, to me, it's not recyclable.
Right.
And of course, that varies from municipality to municipality for different materials. And so what do you think the prospects are for at least some form of national guidelines as to what must be recycled? Do you think that there's the lobbying or the public support for something like that?
I personally don't see it. The closest we've ever come is what's known as the container deposit laws, what people often know as bottle bills. 10 states have passed those. The most recent one was back in the early 90s or 2000s with Hawaii, and even some have gotten repealed since then. So a lot of these states have tried to pass these laws that say, hey, we're going to fund the recycling programs by charging you a fee when you first buy that product that will then be refunded to you when you recycle it. But the market for those has really dried up over the past 20 years. So I don't see any national legislation coming down the line for informing on recyclability.
Yeah, you know, the example in Europe, if you buy a case of beer, you pay somewhere around 20 to 24 euros, so that people actually, and a friend of mine in Austria was telling me about this, you know, you take the beers out, you drink them, you put them back in, and you take the case back in, and you get $20 off. Essentially, you get 20, you know, you get your next deposit back. And that's really effective because everybody is aware of the value of the material. But, you know, mattresses, which is something we're doing some research on right now, there are 3 states in the United States, Canada, California, Connecticut, and Rhode Island charge a mattress recycling fee whenever you buy a mattress. And every mattress store in the state is required to take a mattress back as a result of that fee. But that's the only 3 places. Yeah.
You know, when you get your oil changed at a Jiffy Lube or something like that, they charge you a recycling fee. And I think when it's built in like that, I think people become accustomed to it.
Yeah, and in that case, they're already making money on the recycling. They're simply charging you a convenience fee to have it done. That's actually just a little extra margin for them.
Interesting.
But it could be built into virtually every product system.
Yeah. Trey, glass is kind of a surprise to me, but other than glass, was there anything that you found that you were kind of surprised was not easily recyclable?
A lot of different plastics. Anything besides a bottle, it's really going to depend on how big the city is and what kind of infrastructure they have. Because plastic recycling just has so many levels to it, whether it's bags or what's called the rigid plastics, those tubs. It just depends on what the infrastructure is available. What I will say is the conclusion I made in the story, I definitely encourage readers to take to heart, is instead of asking, can I recycle this product? You really need to think bigger. And we talked about it a little earlier on the podcast. We need to start when we shop looking at these labels and determining what percentage of this product and this packaging is coming from recycled material.
Right.
Something I think a lot of people aren't aware of is if you actually look at the recycling logo, those 3 arrows, they actually have some symbolism to them. It's the 3 steps in recycling: collection, processing, and then remanufacturing. And we as consumers, we're only involved in the first part, that collection, and then someone else takes the rest. But once it's remanufactured, we have to buy it. We have to be telling these companies, hey, you need to be making products out of recycled materials because we're going to buy that stuff. And then the loop is allowed to continue.
Well, so I think your other story is a great place to tie this in. So your waste audit, and I loved it because you laid out all your waste, and there's a photo of it. So it really helps you get a good sense of what we're talking about. There's a lot of plastic there in your home audit. So tell us about how to do a home audit, a home waste audit, and what did you find is working these days?
Absolutely. So if you haven't ever done a waste audit, I'll warn you right now, it is messy. It can smell a bit depending on how long you've left things in your garbage can before trying to audit them. But it is really effective to know what you generate and how you can make changes to your life to generate less waste. The biggest thing I actually laid out step-by-step outline of how to do it. You've got to figure out how long you want to do it for. And you've got to put aside some space that you're not worried about getting dirty, because even if you're rinsing your recycling, the garbage is the really dirty stuff. Once you have food waste and packaging mixed in together, it's going to get messy. There's going to be some stuff that will not smell very well, but I definitely think it's worth the effort.
So you're saying take a week or 2 weeks, choose that period of time so that it's fixed so you can calculate your monthly or annual from that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do a week because my house gets weekly garbage collection. If you are in a city that gets bi-weekly or once every 2 weeks, you can adjust your audit as necessary, but you should know how often you're filling up your bin, most importantly. But when I did my audit, you can see a picture of it on the website, as Evelyn mentioned. I actually broke down the materials into which cart they went into, whether recycling or garbage, what type of material they were, and then the quantity of each material. And as Evelyn mentioned, the biggest thing for me is those food packing bags, frozen food, plastic. I had 27 of those over a week. It's just something where even if I take them to the grocery store, I can't put them in that plastic bag recycling bin. So unfortunately, that has to go in the garbage in my community. But it's really helpful to know what you have. The other big thing is paper. I had 22 pieces of mixed paper, most of which were from the mail. And I've done everything that I can to reduce the mail that I have coming to my house. I've gotten myself off of these databases. I've gotten opted out of phone book. I've put all my bills to paperless. And I still get 22 pieces of mail in a given week. So it's definitely something that luckily it's recyclable in my community, but it's something that we're generating that material just on a weekly basis.
It's an analog to all the calls you get on your phone, even though we're supposed to live in a time when you can't just call anybody on the phone and market to them, and that you can't get that time back. And in this case, you can't get that petroleum into the recycling stream. These are losses that we could be planning around and fixing.
Yeah. So when you did your audit, Trey, what was something that I think the mail, actually 22 pieces of mail a week doesn't seem that high to me. That actually seems pretty low. But what things did you see that you thought, oh, okay, that's something I can fix?
If you see the picture in the article, you're going to see 11 plastic bottles. And I'm not proud to say that 7 of them are water bottles. They're very warm summers here in Arizona. And as much as I'd like to use reusable in the tap, I often find that I am buying bottled water just to make it so it's convenient to take it on the go and make sure I stay hydrated in the warm weather.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I have a water bottle with me all the time, and I yet still will occasionally pick up a bottle of water because you just don't always anticipate.
I'm guilty as charged.
Yeah. Yeah. So water bottles and maybe paper.
Candy wrapper. It's 16 candy wrappers, which means not only is it not the healthiest food, but that's something I should probably be looking forward to in box form or buying it bulk at the grocery store.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and I guess with candy wrappers, too, if you really want to get picky, there's some that come with a paper and a foil liner, and then there's some that come with sort of that plastic wrapper. So maybe you can make some choices there.
Metallic kind of plastic, too.
Right. That's even harder, isn't it? Yeah.
And I believe part 2 of the audit is live on the website as of this morning. So I did some more analysis in there. For people who haven't read the story yet, check out part 2 as well, because it gives more insight as how I evaluated my waste generation efforts.
Everybody check these all 3 stories out. What's Recyclable and the 2 steps of the home audit, because they have been some of the most shared stories we've done recently, and people are really responding to them. So it's good information. Thanks, Trey.
I think so too. Really good information. So next we thought, since school is starting back, we'd talk a little bit about some stories we have on the website of either greening your school or getting your kids more green in school. The 3 stories are, the first is simple ways to green your school. The second story is start the school year green and healthy. And the third story is sustainable swaps for a green school year. So all 3 are on the website. They're all very helpful. And what we thought we'd do is just sort of talk a little bit about all of them in a general sense.
So let's start with school supplies. If you're already in school and you know what you're doing there, you've been in for a couple of years, you probably have a good set of lists, what you're going to, what supplies, pencils, rulers, and so forth you're going to need. The question you need to ask when you get those lists as a parent or as a child who's interested in being more sustainable is, are these really good choices?
Right.
And several of the stories do a great job of essentially laying out how to ask, do the really need this question that goes along with all of these recommendations. So, first thing is you don't have to buy all this stuff new. So go back, look at your old folders, old binders, pencil boxes and pencils and pens and other things that you've got from previous years. Try to keep most of that and move it forward. And then the other thing, a lot of the times, particularly in schools these days, you send some form of hand sanitizer to school with your kids. Look for the green alternatives there. That's one that we would strongly recommend. They don't have to wash their hand all day long. Hands, generally.
Generally two.
Plural. And it's something that has a toxic or non-toxic effect on the environment as well. So that's the first 2 things from the list was were do we really need that, and which kind of the thing do we really need, the green or the polluting one? Well,
and I'll add in too, sometimes if you want to do a little bit more work, this may be more over the summer than the day before school starts, but there are some places that are supply places, so surplus places. So, for example, here in Washington, we have a state surplus store from all state agencies and all schools. It's down about 30 miles to the south of Tacoma, and it's great. I mean, you can get big binders for $1 a piece. You can get all kinds of printer paper. Everything's at a steep discount, and these are things that agencies have just no use for at the moment.
And a lot of times agencies have sustainability guidelines in their buying, so it'll be recycled paper. It'll be paper that came from a renewable source.
Yeah. So think about that. That way you can save some money and also be engaging in reuse and recycling. Another thing that was mentioned in several of the articles is a non-toxic backpack. And I have to say, I do not remember ever thinking about the toxicity of my backpacks.
I can't. That was a new one for me too, but it makes sense. A lot of backpacks are made from PVC, the same stuff that piping is made from, and so it's made from plastic. Polyvinyl chloride is what it's called, PVC, and you can usually smell it. And now that I think about it, I can remember smelling new backpacks, smelling plasticky. But there are alternatives, and I think the place to start is looking at Patagonia, which is probably the most responsible maker of outdoor equipment out there, and they're using sustainable textiles. So that could include hemp or linen that's been recovered from other uses. There's also the Ultimate Green store, which has a selection of PVC-free backpacks, and they're all made from recycled materials. So you're not only getting something that isn't coming from plastic, but you're getting something that's been used before and is being reused again.
There's also a suggestion that if you are buying new school supplies, look for eco-friendly school supplies. So look for those that are made from recycled or biodegradable materials. This is helpful not only for you, but also for your schoolroom and your school friends, because as you can imagine, a school room that's full of all new products that are have strong chemical components, it becomes a pretty toxic schoolroom, I guess. Well,
and there are also some really nice ideas here, too, that don't just have to do with the toxicity. I love the idea of using a fountain pen. I've been a fountain pen person all my life, and it does keep me writing thinking about the output of the writing rather than just as kind of a product of my body. I love the interaction of a pen. So getting a refillable steel tip fountain pen is a great way to reinforce the importance of writing for your kids and to get the environment to be a little better off.
Yeah, I think that is one where, especially if you've got a child who's sort of a little bit gadget-centric, then a refillable fountain pen could be exactly the thing. I think that's tough for little kids, though. I mean, they're pretty messy.
Well, there's a point where I suppose you would want to introduce that. Yeah. I wouldn't want to, a kindergartner, it would make a real mess.
But then maybe they use pencils.
Generally, I would say that's probably true.
Yeah. There's also a suggestion in one of the stories for a do-it-yourself pencil case, so where you can take scraps of fabric, glue and zippers, and put them together to make a pencil case yourself. And that's a particularly good suggestion. The second area all these stories had for improving both the quality and the reducing the wastefulness of your school supplies is in the arena of lunches. One story suggests setting up a waste-free lunch system so that you would have a lunch box that you take with you rather than bags. You would avoid using plastic baggies and plastic wrap. You would have a reusable water bottle. And instead of the baggies and plastic wrap, you'd have some little containers. You could certainly do
reusable containers.
Reusable containers. You could. There are lots of sort of Tupperware type containers, but there's also increasingly today more stainless steel containers, which are easily washed and don't put off any nasty byproducts.
And on the reusable water bottles, it's important to stay away from plastic for the most part. And even this week, there's been some research out about bisphenol A, BPA. I think I'm saying it correctly. BPA is a liner, and it's also a form of plastic, a liner in aluminum cans, and it's also a form of plastic that you would get a water bottle made of. But this research suggests that it lowers sperm levels in men and that it causes biological changes in young women too. And so we're not sure whether BPA is a good thing. Look to see whether or not the liner of your water bottle is made of BPA, even if it's made of metal.
Oh, very interesting. Okay. So you want to look for a BPA-free water bottle.
And, the benefit of doing this, the EPA estimates that the average school-age child using just a disposable lunch generates 67 pounds of waste per school year.
Wow.
So, for an average size middle school, that's 40,000 pounds of waste that you could avoid.
Yeah. I guess I'll say this too. I mean, some of these things I think are, I'm not a parent myself, but I think some of these things are like, one more level of parenting that you can go up to. I mean, it can be a lot of pressure on a parent to sort of make everything healthy and safe and good. But, there's even little things you can do. Like if you do use some plastic baggies, have your child bring those home.
Right. Teach them to participate in the process of making the earth cleaner. It's also, I read some research about just having kids do housework around the house makes them more responsible as adults. They're more aware of the need and responsibility to participate with other people to complete tasks. And so sending your kids to school with a set of guidelines for, bring back the plastic bags. Let's make sure that we don't or throw any aluminum away into a garbage can, but bring it home for recycling or put it in the recycling at school. Those are things that are going to last and travel with your kids throughout their lives. And I'd say that, from sustainability at home to sustainability at school, that is a lifestyle that you can teach your children starting at any age.
Yeah, I would also add this, that, one of the articles talks about packing healthy whole foods, which is a wonderful idea. But I would add to that, as Mitch says, involve your child in putting, what foods do they want to eat and helping them put it together. You are much more likely, if your child has been selecting the carrots and putting them in the little container, that your child might actually eat those carrots at school rather than, trading them away for a Twinkie or something like that.
Well, and you also see what they're choosing and can make choices about what their diet consists of. And if you can get your kids to think about the food they're eating, they're not going to end up being one in 6 kids who has an obesity problem at an early age too. So there's a lot of reasons for them to be involved in this, and it's not simply to instruct them or guide them. It is for them to internalize these things and start making their own decisions and thinking about these choices.
And one tip I would give for the teachers out there is bring in an expert to talk to kids about these green issues. There's a recycling office in every major city in America, and they are happy to come out and bring educational speakers to talk to the kids, show them about recycling. They even have, in Phoenix, they have a dinosaur called Recycle Rex. They bring him into the schools, and he plays with the kids, and they learn about recycling, and they teach their parents, which is really cool.
That is excellent, because that's going to make it more of a fun thing and more of something that, all of your peers are excited about too.
And a sustainable Barney is going to jangle everybody's spurs.
That's right. Everybody's going to be excited about that. Hey, the articles also give us some great advice on getting involved with your school, being a partner with the school, getting your students involved in various important environmental dates, and also has some tips on funding for getting grants and doing fundraisers. So these 3 articles are a nice start to the year, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a good read every year as you think about going through it. You might also want to finish the school year by looking at this and kind of, as Trey did, an audit. Did we do well?
Well, that's a good idea.
Well, there's one more story we wanted to talk about, and that's what happened at the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco. We did a preparation piece back on September 12th, just before the event started, and the marches had begun a week earlier with the Rise Together movement, which was there were marches all over the world. And the Global Climate Action Summit, which was hosted by Jerry Brown and Michael Bloomberg in San Francisco, was a venue in which nonprofits, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, business, environmental leaders, and citizens got together and talked about some big issues, everything from how to finance the future of renewable energy to, as our friend Peter Fikowski of the Healthy Climate Alliance did a session on carbon capture and sequestration. But there were dozens, hundreds of these sessions about all sorts of different areas. Native response to climate change it was a particularly large one and very compelling. There were a number of presentations by native communities on opposite sides of the world being affected by the same problems of climate change.
Oh, interesting.
And so you could watch this live, and you can still go back and watch this live on the the Climate Action Summit site. Or I guess it's archival. It's not live. They don't do the same show every day. But you could watch all of these sessions and learn an immense amount, as well as get inspired. The other thing is that there's a number of resources to follow up on afterwards. You can join organizations which became part of the march on over the weekend that followed it on September 15th. Interfaith Power and Light, People's Climate Movement, Rise for Climate, which was what I mentioned a few moments ago, and Indigenous Environmental were some of the most prominent sources of continuing action once the summit ended. And another thing to look at is the Global Climate Action Summit's Facebook page, where ongoing updates about follow-up activity are going on. A couple of other ways to find this information if you want to go searching is to use hashtags. So the hashtag GCAS 2018 is it was appended to all the official news from the event. Hashtag Eye on Climate and hashtag StepUp2018 are two more that you can use to find a lot of the conversation that is still continuing weeks after this event. And I'd say that after the Paris Accord meetings in 2015, this is probably the most significant event that has happened in a long time. There were, for instance, commitments to stop the deforestation of the Cerrado region in Brazil, which is one of the most aggressively deforested areas in the world right now, to the point where they're launching satellites to watch this meter by meter as it is taken out. Wow. And now that we can see this stuff, a consortium of investors and companies that managed trillions of dollars got together and said, we're just not going to support this anymore. And so when that happens, we need to applaud what we can about that. And if there are shortcomings, we need to fix those shortcomings. But these are people from all over the world, from every walk of life, who know that we need to make this change in the economy. And it's a really inspiring place and story to be on the net. Not that Earth911 isn't even more so.
Oh, of course. But is this going to recur annually, or
this is essentially a one-off? But okay. I can imagine that the network will continue to evolve, and you'll see more and more events like this. There are events in the fall in London, for instance. There's America Recycles Day, which is coming up on November 15th. That is a project of Keeping America Beautiful, and we'll be covering those kinds of things as well.
Great. Excellent.
So let's move on to our Earthling questions. We had a couple of really interesting ones this week.
We had a doozy for that first one. So Deanne asked us a question on Facebook. Now, we're concealing her location because we're trying to avoid a conflict with her landlord. But she says, we ran a duplex. Since we moved in May 2018, we've had a very unpleasant odor of sewer gas, no sulfur smell. Our neighbors in the same building say it's making them ill. How can we find out the level of danger in our home? The landlord is not complying. Is there a type of harmful gas that we're breathing, and is it harmful to the ozone or the earth? Nobody will help us, and we live in a neighboring community somewhere in the vicinity of Las Vegas.
Well, the landlord is required by the law to respond, but if they're not, we suggest you do a couple of things. And in this case, and we'll just use Nevada as an example, call the Department of Health and Human Services. They have a 211 hotline in Nevada, and you can find that at if you go to the dhhs.nv.gov site, you'll find links to that. But that will allow you to actually report the illnesses that your neighbors are experiencing, and that should get somebody out there to do a test, an environmental test on what it is that you're smelling. The other thing that you should do is call the City Hall and ask for the landlord-tenant compliant hotline. And in Southern Nevada, there's a link which we shared with Deanne on Facebook, so she has it. But you can call and ask them to intercede on your behalf as a tenant with the landlord. And conversely, the landlord can do that with a tenant who is doing something to the property. So it's a service that works for both both sides. And we would certainly encourage you not to just sit and take it.
No, with any kind of an odor, it's possible that there's a chemical toxicity going on. But it's also possible that something is wrong in your septic or your sewage system. And that's not good either.
Nope.
Because that's all E. coli and other bacteria contaminants. And if it's backing up or leaking in some way or getting into your water supply, you can get really, really seriously ill.
Yep. And so Deanne, take action. We asked her to follow up with us and let us know how it works out, and we'll find out maybe tell the story when we can. Yeah.
So I mentioned, Trey, this kind of makes me think, suppose there's some other chemical spill or something, or someone is, dumping their used motor oil outside in the backyard and you're in an apartment. What kind of things should you be doing if you see something like that?
Well, again, report it to the local Health and Human Services or to the local waste management system, particularly in illegal dumping. They would be the ones with the jurisdiction to do that. What do you think, Trey?
Yeah, I think reporting is really the key area here. If it's a business, you could start to spread the word on social media and give them some pressure to stop doing it. But if it's just a person, really just informing the local authorities is the best way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And action. You are a citizen. You have the right to do this stuff. This is what makes our country great.
Absolutely.
So second question, also from Facebook, comes from Ashley in Raleigh, North Carolina. And she says, my daughter is an all-star cheerleader and has noticed that their gym is in need of a recycling program, and she wants to help kick it off. Good job. Can you give me any pointers on how to get started? We have a collection of articles that Ashley might find useful. And so if you go to Earth911 and just search on Start Recycling School, you'll get a number of stories. But the main thing to keep in mind is that you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to walk in and just try to start a recycling program. The administration of the school will be interested in this kind of thing because it's a good behavior for them to support. But there are a lot of resources in the community from businesses and nonprofits that are interested in helping schools and kids be more sustainable, as well as interested in getting good press for having helped. And so don't be shy about going out and asking somebody who is a prominent member of your business community to get involved in supporting. Maybe they can give $1,000 to get the materials that you need, which would be a few bins and a way of tracking what's being collected. So you want that project to become a self-sustaining thing. You don't want to have to constantly be putting more and more effort and money into it without an increasing return. So, read the articles. We think that they'll be useful. And if you want the project to be self-sustaining, one thing to think about is going right to a local recycling company to say, would you like all this stuff? They may be able to sort of forward you payments on the first set of materials that you're going to drop off, and that'll help you kickstart it too. There's a lot of creative ways to start a recycling program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's excellent information on the website. And I think it depends too. If there hasn't been any recycling, maybe you start small with water bottles. And if there has been, if it's a cheerleader group, I'm thinking of the stories that Trey has done on things like recycling tennis shoes and things like that. It could be a lot.
Our lives are full of waste. Let's reduce it.
That's right. Full of waste. That's the story of our lives.
Well, so far.
Yeah. So that's what we have for this week. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can always send us an email. Send it to feedback@earth911.com. And you can follow us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and of course at our earth911.com website. We'll see you next time.
Stay tuned. Keep on recycling.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Trey.
Thank you, Trey.